Welcome this morning. A lot of interesting developments around this whole idea that we now have in just 10 days' time the opportunity to inaugurate a convicted felon to the highest office in the land, and no one seems to give a damn about that. Let's listen real quick, if we can, Andrew, to Donald Trump on Friday during the New York sentencing.
It's been a political witch hunt. It was done to damage my reputation so that I'd lose the election, and obviously that didn't work. And the people of our country got to see this firsthand because they watched the case in your courtroom. They got to see this firsthand, and then they voted, and I won and got the largest number of votes by far of any Republican candidate in history.
So, Andrew, Alicia raised the point about accountability in the opening. How do we hold this presidential felon accountable?
Well, in terms of the voters, that has not happened. In terms of criminal justice system, it has happened in a sort of weak tea, and that's no shade on Judge Merchan or Alvin Bragg. They actually look the best in terms of the criminal justice system, but frankly, our whole country in our criminal justice system looks pretty bad, I think, in terms of this country and certainly internationally, people looking from outside in terms of how we have done in terms of holding somebody to account. And that just, regardless of what the verdict would be, we have a incoming president who managed to escape 3 out of 4 criminal cases. And even for the one that concluded yesterday, he received a sentence that, frankly, he would not otherwise have received, but for the fact that in 10 days he will be inaugurated. But otherwise, it was clear that Judge Merchan would not have given him an unconditional discharge.
Mark, the New York Times added some context around that decision, writing, quote, a New York Times analysis revealed that Judge Merchan had ample ground to consider incarceration. Since 2014, a third of defendants sentenced to the most serious charge of falsifying business records in the first degree in Manhattan received jail time, amounting to less than a year behind bars. Other defendants received prison time, more than a year's incarceration, or were sentenced to probation, conditional discharges, community service, or fines. No other defendant in the cases examined received an unconditional discharge. Help me make sense of that, Mark.
You can't make sense of it. I think that Andrew calling it weak tea is about as strong as you can describe it. I mean, we just have to, I feel like I'm channeling, honestly, my inner Chairman Steele here. Like, let's just be real for a second, okay? The fact is that Donald Trump committed crimes in the state of New York, right? Let's set aside the federal cases, as Andrew points out, he skated by. He committed crimes in New York. What did the judge do? The judge found that he was in contempt of court several times. No consequences. The judge, and it was obvious that he was constantly bad-mouthing the jury, he was bad-mouthing law clerks, he was attacking the judge. No consequences. Then it comes to sentencing. The judge says in advance of sentencing, don't worry, I'm not going to actually impose any real penalty. In advance of actually the sentencing even taking place. Then that goes up to the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court says, fine, the sentencing can go forward, but what's their reasoning? And I'm not talking about the 4 now. I'm talking about the 5 justices that said it could go forward. They said it could go forward in part because, number 1, there won't be any consequence. Number 2, he doesn't have to show up in person. Number 3, it won't take too much of his time. I mean, the only thing we left out is like giving him, parking validation and making sure he didn't have to pay congestion pricing to travel to the courthouse. I mean, was there anything more we could have done, perhaps, to make this convenient for Donald Trump? And so then the judge does the sentencing, and what does Donald Trump do? He again trashes the system. And what does the prosecutor do? The prosecutor agrees there should be no consequence. I mean, Andrew, how many cases have you prosecuted? How many cases are you aware of where you or someone else prosecuted as the prosecutor saying that there should be no consequence, even if the judge gave no consequence, that the prosecutor agrees? I mean, at the end of the day, okay, fine, he is a convicted felon going into the presidency. But, look in this camera, any one of you, I dare you, and to tell the American people that there is one standard of justice for the powerful and the non-powerful, that everyone is equal standing before the bar of law, that there is equal justice under the law. I mean, I just don't know how you can look at this and say that as you evaluate what it means for the country and rule of law and the justice system, that this was anything other than a failure. And this shows what happens when you bring norms to a Trump fight.
Here, here.
I was going to say, you channel well, Padawan.
Look, Andrew, I don't know if you agree or not, but I have to say, in listening to the sentencing yesterday, I was in my kitchen, honey. I was doing them dishes I should have did the night before, and I was aghast, is a word I've been using the last 24 hours. I was aghast at just the enormity of what I was witnessing, listening to, because we had the audio on MSNBC. And then to hear the president-elect get up and trash the judge on the live stream, I was like, what is going on here? What is going on? First of all, you one dude, why do you have to go out? Why are you walking out with the belt swing? I don't understand. But furthermore, it felt very performative. It felt like, oh, well, the justice system said this is kind of what we should do, so da-da-da-da. Especially after the prosecutor was like, he did all of these things, yet he's not going to have any consequences. I understand that he is the president-elect of the United States. I completely understand that. But let somebody else tell you that actually you're not going to send them to jail. Don't you? What are we talking about complying in advance? I am concerned about the way in which the justice system seems to have made adjustments in and of itself because of a job someone used to have and now the job they're going into. I understand it's the most powerful job in the world, but everybody, there is not equal justice under the law. And if it's not, why don't they just say that? Help me, because there's people out there like me, Andrew, that are like, I don't know about this.
Well, look, I agree with Mark. There's no way to make this palatable. The one thing I can say is that the judge made clear that he was doing this because of the respect for the presidency, not for the inhabitant of that of the White House going forward. In other words, it had nothing to do with the individual case or the individual defendant. He was trying to make sure that people understood that this was out of respect for the role of the presidency. But you're absolutely right that, normally a defendant can spout off and can say all sorts of things and can say they're innocent and do all of that. But one, they're usually not about to be the head of our legal system when they do that. And second, it reminds me of a story when I was a sort of young prosecutor where a defendant did just that before he was sentenced. And the judge looked at him and said, ordinarily what you just said is the kind of thing you should say after you're sentenced, meaning that those statements are usually something that the court considers when imposing sentence to say, you show no remorse, you show disrespect for the law, you show that you're a recidivist, and there are just so many aggravating factors that the judge normally could take into account. And I think that what we see here is not just that we have two systems of justice. Lots of people have talked about how race and class really sort of create two very different systems of justice in this country. But there really is a third system just reserved for Donald Trump, and how much the courts have bent over backwards to give him something that no one else would get. And not just because of his new role, but because of sort of his wealth and his power. He is being treated differently.
So, Mark, before we go to a break, I just want to put a capstone on this part of the conversation because we're here now. We've done it. The system bent over and willingly gave itself up to Donald Trump. All right. So the question I have is, do you see corrective measures on the other side of this? Okay. Simone is like, oh, hell no, there are no corrective measures. But I'm just curious if you think the House and the Senate, in some future iteration of those two bodies, decide, what? We're going to recenter the checks and balances in our judicial system in such a way that now we know just how low we can go, and we're going to try to level this thing back up. Or we are in a space now that every president going forward, can do what we see Donald Trump do, and as well as, look, we're developing an oligarchy here. We've got a very wealthy, small group of men who control a lot more than we're writing about in our newspapers, right? And what does the justice system look like for them? If we can, because they're in Trump's ear, and how much protection does he give him? So what does this system look like after this?
It's one of the reasons why right after the election, I came on and I talked to you all about the need to build a new opposition as opposed to a resistance. Because the thing is, this is not going to self-correct itself in 60 days or even in 2 years. This is something that is going to take a while. Unfortunately, because as you point out, let's assume that right now, one of the supplicant billionaires who is, in between bowing and scraping, winds up on the wrong side of the law. Donald Trump will just pardon him, right? So it's going to take a while for us to figure out how, as an opposition movement, to build the structures, to build the culture necessary to deal with the new reality. But I think we need to recognize that it is a new reality, and we need to not sort of cling to, as Andrew said, the weak tea.
All right.